A man takes his wife on a weekend getaway, hoping to save their failing marriage. But what he doesn't realize is that this trip isn't just filled with romance. It's hiding deadly secrets that could cost someone their life. The story begins with Dan, who was once a successful film director. Now his career is falling apart, and his wife Lisa is also struggling to make it as an actress. Their marriage has reached a breaking point, so Dan suggests spending a few days together at a quiet lakeside cabin, far away from the chaos of the city, hoping they can give their relationship one last chance. But even during the drive, the couple starts arguing about money and their failed careers. The tension quickly ruins the mood, turning the entire trip into an uncomfortable and emotional journey. When they finally arrive at the cabin, Lisa notices several strange things. An item that was always kept in the same place has been moved, and despite the house being abandoned for a long time, there are clear signs that someone has visited recently. Still, she brushes it off, convincing herself that she's just imagining things. Meanwhile, Dan secretly heads down to the basement where he inspects a collection of brand new hunting rifles. What makes it even stranger is that only 2 people are staying in the cabin, yet there are far more weapons than anyone could possibly need. A little later, Dan tells Lisa he's going into the woods to hunt. But instead of tracking animals, he gathers several heavy objects and hides them inside a boat parked along the edge of the lake. After returning to the cabin, he pulls out a bottle containing a dangerous chemical and stares at it for a long time, as if he's wrestling with a life-changing decision. At the same time, Lisa is completely focused on memorizing lines for an upcoming audition, with no idea about the disturbing things happening around her. Dan slowly walks toward her, but in the very next moment, everything changes. When Dan regains consciousness, he finds himself tied to a chair. Standing in front of him is Lisa, wearing a cold smile filled with anger. She has gathered all the suspicious items he tried to hide and placed them right in front of him. Now it's obvious that Dan came to the cabin with a dangerous plan. Under pressure, Dan finally confesses. He recently discovered that Lisa had been involved in an affair with another man, but Lisa refuses to stay silent. She accuses Dan of never understanding her feelings and says their marriage had been falling apart for years, leaving nothing but an empty relationship in name only. Then comes the biggest twist of all. Lisa admits that Dan wasn't the only one who arrived at the cabin with a secret plan. She had also prepared a scheme of her own, one designed to make everything look like nothing more than a tragic hunting accident. This meant that instead of trusting each other, both husband and wife had already decided the only solution was to get rid of one another. Dan laughs at the flaws in Lisa's plan and sarcastically tells her that this is probably why she never made it as a successful actress. His words hit Lisa hard and leave a deep emotional scar. At that moment, consumed by anger, she grabs a weapon and is just about to make her move when an unknown man suddenly appears behind her. Before anyone can react, a brutal attack erupts, turning the entire room into a scene of bloodshed and absolute chaos. The story then jumps back a few days. It's revealed that the mysterious man is Frank, an old friend of Dan's. Afraid that he might fail to carry out his own plan, Dan had secretly brought Frank in as a backup and promised him a huge payout in return. But what Dan never realized was that once a dangerous game gets a third player, nobody stays in control for long. When Lisa regains consciousness, all the anger she has been holding back explodes. One by one, long-hidden secrets begin to surface. She reveals that Dan wasn't just a failed film director. He was also hopelessly addicted to gambling. He had already gambled away most of his savings, his assets, and even his future. Lisa explains that if they had gone through with the divorce, she wouldn't have walked away with money at all. Instead, she would have inherited a mountain of debt. Meanwhile, Frank starts growing suspiciously. He realizes that the insurance payout Dan had told him about is only a fraction of the actual amount. Sensing the opportunity, Lisa quickly makes him a new offer. She promises that if Frank joins her side, she'll make sure he gets an even bigger share. Not willing to lose, Dan immediately counters with an even more tempting deal. Within moments, the entire situation becomes so bizarre that it feels less like a murder plot and more like a twisted crime auction. Both husband and wife desperately try to buy Frank's loyalty and turn him against the other. Frank has no idea whom to trust, but this dangerous mix of greed and betrayal doesn't last for long. Suddenly, everything spirals out of control, and violence erupts once again. When the smoke finally clears, Frank is the first victim to fall in this deadly game. With the middleman gone, the old war between husband and wife resumes. Lisa grabs a weapon and rushes upstairs while Dan chases after her. The two collide in a savage fight, crashing to the floor as they wrestle desperately for control of the weapon. But then, something happens that no one could have imagined. Without warning, a section of the ceiling suddenly collapses, and three complete strangers come crashing down into the room from above. Before Dan and Lisa can even process what's happening, the entire situation takes a shocking turn. The story now flashes back to reveal the truth. These three men are actually dangerous criminals who had been hiding from the police inside this isolated cottage. For days, they had been secretly living in the attic, waiting for the perfect chance to escape. The strange marks around the house, the missing key, and the leftover food scraps were all clues that someone else had been living there. As fate would have it, they had spent all this time silently watching Dan and Lisa's lies, betrayals, arguments, and twisted schemes unfold below them. To them, it was like sitting front row at a real-life crime show. Now that they've been exposed, the criminals waste no time taking control. They overpower Dan and Lisa and immediately demand money. But Dan is already broke and has almost nothing to give them. That answer only infuriates Pete. The atmosphere grows even darker as the three criminals begin playing cruel mind games with the couple, enjoying every second of the fear and power they have over them. Dan quickly realizes this is no longer just a robbery. Their lives are now hanging by a thread. Then the situation takes another unexpected twist. One of the gang members notices an old movie poster hanging on the wall. He suddenly recognizes it as a film that Dan directed years ago. In an instant, the criminal's attitude changes. They recognize Dan and start talking about his past work. For a brief moment, Dan believes this strange connection might save his life. But he soon understands that things aren't that simple. Even when dangerous people become your fans, they're still dangerous. Trying to keep the situation under control, Lisa reveals that she has some savings and offers to hand over the money if they spare their lives. As the night drags on, Dan and Lisa are tied up and locked inside the basement. By now, they both know the terrifying truth. Even if the criminals get every dollar they want, there's still no guarantee they'll make it out alive. For the first time, the two of them put their old grudges aside and started thinking as a team. They realized that if they wanted to make it out alive, they had to work together. Sitting in the basement, Dan carefully looked around the room. His eyes landed on an old game table and a few random items lying nearby. Little by little, an escape plan began taking shape in his mind. Meanwhile, upstairs, Pete and the others were busy planning their next move, completely unaware that Dan was patiently waiting for the perfect opportunity. After a while, Dan claimed that he needed to use the bathroom. Todd wasn't careless. He had already removed anything that could be used as a weapon or escape tool. Even so, the moment Dan got a chance, he secretly began cutting through the ropes that were tying him up. Upstairs, the kidnappers slowly started sensing that something wasn't right below. At the same time, Lisa somehow managed to sneak out of the house and sprint toward the car. For a brief moment, she believed she was finally free. But then she froze, realizing the car keys were still inside the house. Before she could figure out what to do next, Todd suddenly stepped right in front of her. Desperate to stay alive, Lisa tried to distract him by keeping him talking. Todd hesitated for just a second, unsure of what to do. That tiny moment was all Dan needed. He rushed in from behind and attacked Todd without warning. But the odds were still against them. Todd was far stronger than either of them, and even with Dan and Lisa fighting together, they couldn't overpower him easily. The struggle grew more intense with every passing second. Then, out of nowhere, Lisa launched another attack and managed to injure Todd. The wound wasn't severe enough to stop him, but it pushed him into a blind rage. Consumed by anger, Todd charged straight at them, making the situation even more dangerous than before. The noise attracted the rest of his partners, who rushed into the room. Within moments, the entire house turned into a battlefield filled with chaos, screams, and desperate fighting. In the middle of the confusion, Dan spotted a weapon lying on the floor and reached for it. But in his haste, he lost his balance. Todd immediately pounced on him, determined to finish him off. Lisa realized that if she didn't act right then, everything would be over. With every ounce of strength she had left, she fought back. The fight became so brutal that moments later, Todd collapsed to the ground and never got back up. But their nightmare wasn't over yet. Pete and his other accomplices were still alive. Dan and Lisa rush upstairs and hide inside one of the bedrooms. They crouch silently behind a large wardrobe, barely daring to breathe. Just a short while ago, they couldn't stand each other. But the nightmare unfolding around them has forced them onto the same side. In the middle of the tense silence, Dan hands Lisa the car keys. He tells her that if she gets the chance, she should escape, find the police, and save herself. He's willing to stay behind and distract the killers. This horrifying night has changed him. For the first time in a long while, Dan realizes that no matter how damaged their relationship has become, he still truly cares about Lisa. A few moments later, Lisa quietly slips out of the room and starts making her way toward the exit. But the female criminal has been waiting for exactly that moment. She suddenly grabs Lisa, knocking her to the ground, and another brutal fight erupts. Right then, Dan rushes in and throws himself at the woman with everything he has. The two engage in a fierce hand-to-hand struggle. From above, Pete notices the chaos. Furious, he leaps down from the upper floor without hesitation. Even though the impact leaves him injured, he refuses to stop. He quickly powers up a dangerous piece of machinery nearby and tries to use it as a deadly weapon. Now Dan and Lisa are facing their biggest challenge yet. It's no longer just about escaping. It's about surviving this blood-soaked night alive. As the violence continues around the cottage, another vehicle suddenly arrives. It's Dan's father, Michael. Earlier that evening, the neighbors had warned him that someone had vandalized the farmhouse and that something didn't feel right. Sensing that his family might be in danger, he rushed there immediately. When Michael reaches the property, he wastes no time. He grabs an old hunting rifle and charges in to rescue his son. But luck isn't on his side. During the confrontation with the criminals, he is brutally attacked and suffers life-threatening injuries. Watching his father fall completely shatters Dan. There's no time left to mourn. He and Lisa quickly jump into Michael's truck and try to flee the scene. But Pete isn't about to let them escape and immediately starts chasing them. Panicked and desperate, Dan loses control of the vehicle, sending it crashing into the side of the road. After regaining his senses, he remembers one final way out: a small boat tied up by the lake. He tells Lisa to get there however she can and save herself. Meanwhile, Dan makes a different decision. He vows that he will not leave until he avenges his father's death and settles the score with the killers once and for all. Meanwhile, the injured woman wasn't ready to give up either. She returned to the house, cleaned and bandaged her wounds, and then set out to track Lisa down. A little later, Dan realizes that the attacker never came after him. That's when it hits him. The real target has always been Lisa. Without wasting another second, he sprints toward the lake with everything he has. His worst fear comes true. When Dan reaches the dock, he sees Pete holding Lisa hostage. Pete is getting ready to escape by boat. His plan is simple: take the money, disappear forever, and start a brand new life somewhere far away. Lisa pretends to cooperate because she has no other choice. Deep down, she's just waiting for the perfect opportunity to fight back. Unnoticed by either of them, Dan quietly sneaks up behind them. And that's when the most intense battle of the entire story begins. Near the boat, all three of them collide in a brutal struggle. They shove each other, throw punches, and launch desperate attacks as the situation changes from one second to the next. For a moment, it looks like the criminal has completely won. Pete wraps a thick rope tightly around Dan, cutting off his air and leaving him struggling to breathe. Dan grows weaker with every passing second. But then fate takes an unexpected turn that no one could have predicted. The same rope is attached to a massive stone that had been prepared earlier as part of another deadly plan. During the chaos, the rope becomes tangled, and suddenly the enormous weight starts dragging everything toward the water. In the very next instant, a violent jolt changes everything. Pete loses his balance, and the entire situation flips upside down. The calm lake instantly transforms into a deadly trap. The very trap he had intended for someone else ends up sealing his own fate. With the danger finally over, Dan and Lisa collapse on the shore, completely exhausted. Throughout the night, they lied to each other, fought for survival, stared death in the face, and came dangerously close to losing one another forever. But this horrifying ordeal reveals an uncomfortable truth. The real reason their marriage was falling apart wasn't just the mistakes they had made. It was the lack of communication, the broken trust, and the years of resentment that had quietly built up between them. As the sun rises over the lake, the nightmare finally comes to an end. Dan and Lisa sit silently on the shoreline, drained and overwhelmed. Just hours earlier, they had been plotting against each other. Now, after surviving a night of terror, everything between them has changed. With this, the story ends here. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. Also subscribe to this channel for more stories like this.